Amid all the sound and fury of the debates on the carbon tax and asylum seekers, there's one item on the government's to-do list that's receiving little attention, and that's aged care. During the last election, Julia Gillard promised reform.
If re-elected, further aged care reform will be a second-term priority for my government.
More than 1 million older Australians get some form of government assistance. For most of those, it's helped to stay in their own homes. For the remaining around 200,000, it's residential aged care. But with a population that's ageing, the system for providing care for older Australians is showing the strain. And those involved in the sector, providing, using and representing aged care, say change is now urgent.
We work under an aged care system that was first set up under the Hawke government in the 80s, tinkered with by the Howard government in the 90s, and now needs major reform by the Gillard government early next year.
The current system's been having difficulties for a while, but it's going to really start to be challenged, or in fact it's going to start failing older Australians if we don't see a clear commitment to reform next year, and steps being taken almost immediately to start addressing the changes we need.
The government gave the Productivity Commission the job of looking at the options for reform. In January, it released its interim report. It found several key weaknesses in the system. It's difficult to navigate, the quantity and choice of services is limited, and the quality is variable. There are workforce shortages, and the pricing subsidies and user contributions are inconsistent and inequitable. The draft recommendations include flexible services that meet the individual's needs and the ability to choose the care people want and how it's paid for, an end to the different ways of payment for low and high care, and abolishing the limits on places and care packages. Those who work in aged care say sustainability of the whole system is critical.
Access Economics were able to release a report just a few weeks ago that said it costs about $60 per day to provide a residential aged care bed. Yet the revenue that the provider receives is about half, at $32 per day.
In aged residential care, there's about 82,000 beds that are projected to be needed in the next 10 years. And there's not the funding available in the system to enable providers to build those beds.
For a government that's already dealing with an ageing population and encouraging people to work longer, it's likely any change will centre around helping people stay in their own homes longer, rather than a narrower focus on aged care homes.
The bulk of people will receive all of their care and services, if they require it, in their own home for the rest of their lives. So the large component of where we need to focus our attention, even though it's certainly very expensive and takes up a fair amount of the budget to look after people with quality services in residential care. But the larger component of services is what we provide in the home, the voluntary care that family and partners provide, and the sustaining of people in that home environment.
That's the overwhelming preference of people, that there should be support and care in their home, in their community, that enables them to keep contributing, to keep being members of their families and their community. And we can do an awful lot more with that if we change the system.
Allowing people more options to stay in their own home may make the more controversial recommendations aimed at making those who can afford to pay contribute more easier to swallow. The Howard government faced a bitter backlash early in its term when it proposed accommodation bonds. There is agreement that now is the time to ask more people for a contribution to their own care.
We need a system where wealthy people who, during their lifetime, accommodate themselves in their own home. Like Lyndal, you and I, we pay our mortgage, we pay rent. It should really be no different in aged care. And at the moment, there are prohibitions on that.
The idea that if you have the capacity to pay, that you do pay for your services, seems a reasonable one within Australia.
Those in the sector also think people are willing to contribute in return for more choice and flexibility.
In Australia we are used to means testing things, and I think that people will accept means testing, continuation of means testing in aged care, provided that they see that they're getting a high quality service, that they're getting it promptly, that they have choice, then they're prepared to pay in a fair way.
We need to, as a society, be thinking about how older people who've got a substantial asset in their family home make greater contribution towards both their care, their operating expenses for care, and for their accommodation.
Any significant reform will involve a range of portfolios and build on the established agenda of reform of retirement incomes and health. It may also bring in the national broadband network as a way of helping people stay in their homes longer. The government will also have to solve one of the sector's most intractable problems, that of a workforce shortage. The 750-page plus final Productivity Commission report was handed to the government a fortnight ago. It will be publicly released on the 8th of August. The Minister for Ageing, Mark Butler, will then spend 2 months talking to consumers and their families about the options. Any reforms will be contained in next year's budget. The sector has faith the government will grasp the nettle and make the necessary changes.
We're not toying around on this. If we don't get aged care reform now, what we will get in the years ahead is older Australians going without roofs over their heads.
For probably the first time, the sector is really united in support of the Productivity Commission recommendations. And we really hope that the government will fund the whole package and doesn't simply cherry pick.
They also want coalition support for any reform.
There's now an opportunity for the Abbott opposition to work with the government to come up with a package that puts older Australians first and gets politics out of the road.
If this government doesn't reform the system, the next government will have to do so.
If it becomes a brawl in the political environment between various players, then it becomes difficult for reform.
As the nation's population ages, older Australians are also making up a greater proportion of the voting population. At the last election, nearly a third of all voters were aged 60 and over. So while the government may be in trouble on other areas, in this case as people look to their future as they age, the choice of doing little or doing nothing may end up being the riskier one.